Crista. Thanks for being on the show.
Hey, Jay. Thanks so much for having me today.
So I'm excited to have you on here and talk about some of the things that you specialize in. I was reading through your bio earlier and talking about leaning out your business. I want to get into that in a little bit and talk about what does that mean and how can it help people, because that's what we're all about here, is helping other people grow their businesses. Before we get into those specific nuances and details, tell me a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. You know, it's different for everybody. What made you say, hey, I'm going to run my own thing and now help other people run their own thing? What did that look like for you in the early days of business?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been my story is one of a winding road, as I think it is for many people. But I had always wanted to do my own thing. I never really saw myself as working for somebody else. I wanted to kind of create my own future, if you will. But I took a typical path. I went to college. I got a business degree. I graduated with a lot of college loans. And so while I was building my own business, I got a job. And at the time, I ended up going in, and it was one of my morning customers at a coffee shop that I was managing that said, I'd love to have you work with me, but in order to come in right away, you've got to come in as a consultant because I want you to start right away. And I didn't even know what consulting was back then, but I said, sure, absolutely. I was excited about the opportunity. The pay was great. It sounded phenomenal. So I accepted, I started, and I had come in and quickly realized that I loved project management at the time. And so I had become a project management consultant. And then I went on and led these large global PMOs with, project managers in 12 different countries reporting to me. And then that evolved into really transitioning and working into more of a lean and agile way of working. And I started consulting with other big Fortune, 500 and then Fortune 50 and then Fortune 10 companies. And I've kind of done all of that all along. And then on a parallel path, I actually went to school in addition to business for art. And I have a global accessory brand. And that global accessory brand was actually the catalyst for me starting my current company, which is the Lean Out Method, where I work with coaches and consultants and content creators and small business owners. But while I was growing that business, I know you normally ask questions about challenges and difficulties. So I'm just going to dive right in there because
Sure,
it's such a key part
question.
of my
Go for it.
story. But, while I built that accessory brand, what I did was I ended up scaling it too quickly. I overinvested. I bought too much product. At the time that I was launching my brand new collection was at the time that the fashion and accessory industry changed pretty consistently, pretty significantly. And whereas people used to go to trade shows to do all their buying, that entire process stopped. People started buying online. Collections that you normally would have produced in advance, people started buying more just in time. People stopped pre-producing things. But of course, I realized this after I had invested in all the trade shows, after I had pre-invested in all of the collections. And so I ended up in this really tough spot where all of my sales reps, everyone in my showrooms was telling me, you've got to move production overseas. You've got to drive your pricing down. Middle of the market's fallen out. By the way, the ways that you used to reach customers are no longer the ways to reach customers. So I was at this critical point where either I was going to have to completely close my business or completely reimagine my business. And I didn't want to take production overseas. I respect any company and whatever decisions they make in their business. But for me personally, it was really important that I kept production in the US. So that was where I dug into the other side of what I did in working with these businesses on leaning out and said, I basically have a manufacturing company. I help all of these other manufacturing companies implement Lean and Six Sigma and 5S and all of these strategies that help them cut costs and significantly scale beyond their competitors. Why am I not doing this in my own business? And that's what got me on that journey. And I was able to have a very successful history with my accessory brand there. I did get my prices down. I did keep all the production in the US, and I did pretty significantly lean out that business, which of course attracted a lot of other people wondering how I did it, which ended up being the catalyst for what I have today.
That's awesome. I have so many questions based off all of that. So I'm going to back us way up.
Yep.
And one of the things that you had mentioned at the very beginning there, I always think this is an interesting topic, is you had said you kind of always felt like you wanted to run your own show. I've always felt like that too. I don't think that's for everybody.
Mhm.
And I think that's okay. But what I'm curious about is, do you think that that is like an innate trait that people are born with? Like they have that desire built into them, or is it something that comes about as a result of their environment? So it's really the nature versus nurture question, but focused on entrepreneurship.
I think that we all naturally have a tendency within us, but that being said, that's kind of the nature. But I think sometimes you end up in environments or meeting people or seeing situations that make you realize things are possible you never considered. So
Hmm.
whereas I always felt the desire to have my own business and to be an entrepreneur, I know a lot of other people that never imagined that for themselves, but then realized that that was what they wanted later in life. And I think that's perfectly fine. I think, you grow up with whatever surrounding you're in, and you have a certain series of perspectives because of that. But throughout life, your perspectives change. You get exposed to different things, and that can shift also.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. The interview that I just did prior to this one was a lady who's had she had an extensive career in the corporate world. She worked for 20 plus years, very successfully climbing the typical corporate ladder, and doing it, in a season where that was, it was significantly more difficult for women back then when she was doing that. And since then, she's now also run her own, entrepreneurial company for almost 20 years. And
Hmm.
so sometimes people do go, hey, I've been doing this thing for 20 years, but my life has shifted or changed. And so now this is the best path for me. But I think along the way, it's interesting. You mentioned some of the struggles that you had early on. I think a lot of people think I want to run my own show because they're good at doing a particular thing. They're great at making cupcakes. Somebody says, hey, you should run a cupcake shop. And they go, yeah, maybe I should. Everybody loves my cupcakes. They start a cupcake shop, and then they go, wait a minute, there's all these other things I have to be aware of in business other than just making cupcakes. Now making cupcakes is not
Right.
fun anymore. So there's an art, I think, to actually building the business. It, where are you on that spectrum? I think some people are like hardcore doers. They just want to do the thing, whatever that is. Maybe it's, making a particular item or building a particular thing. And then others are hardcore business builders. They don't actually want to do the thing, but they want to create a business that does the thing. Where are you on that spectrum of entrepreneurship?
I'm actually on both sides of it for both of my businesses. And so in Chris Caro, which is my accessory brand, I am the designer, I am the creative. However, I have my team do everything else. I
Hmm.
retain design and vision. They execute, they make the jewelry, they make sure it gets produced, they quality check it, they pack it, they ship it, they do customer service. They do all the things. I do what I call find the passion piece of it, which is why I started that business, right? I've got the vision, I know where I want to go with it, and I do the actual design work. When it comes to lean out method, I am the chief methodologist, right? I created the method. I know it inside and out. So I am very much in the method, but the method in and of itself is very strategic and very visionary. So a lot of what I do is I'm working with business owners and entrepreneurs, or even some of the Fortune 50, companies that I consult with, is I'm basically coaching and consulting them on how to do what I do best.
Hmm.
So I'm not necessarily day in, day out doing it,
Right.
but I'm teaching other people how to do it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's dig in on some of those things a little bit. A couple of words that you threw out in some of your conversation that our project management listeners will be very familiar with, like lean and agile. Other people that are listening have no idea what that even means. Maybe they've heard them before. Maybe just like take us all the way down to the basic level. What do those things mean in general? I know agile is kind of a relatively complex thing to explain to people who don't know what it is, but give us like the kindergarten version of what those things are. Then let's talk about what you mean by lean out method and how it compares or relates, because I don't know enough to know. So tell me.
Yeah, so I mentioned I started my career in project management, and I started in more of that traditional project management sense. And so when you think about project management, it's a very prescriptive way of planning where you're saying, I've got this big project to do. What are the very specific things that I need to do, in what order, on what day? What are my dependencies, right? And you're really in advance mapping everything out. And they typically tend to be really large scale projects. And in advance, you're trying to predict what's going to happen at a point in time in the future. And that was how project management was done for a really long time. And what people found over time was you can't actually usually predict with a high level of confidence that far out in the future. And if you can make smaller bets, you actually get much better results. So you directionally know where you're going and where you want the result that you want out of your project, but you're just planning in these smaller little increments to say, what can I plan and try right now? Can I learn something from that? And then plan the next thing, always going directionally correct. And so that's what Agile is. It's much more of that adaptive planning where you are doing small, short, little cycles, usually in 2-week increments. And you're looking at what can I do in these 2 weeks and commit to? How can I learn from it? How can I leverage those learnings to shift and adapt the things that I do next? And so what people typically find is, let's say you had a target of the end of the year. Well, with that more traditional planning that used to be done, at the beginning place, you would have this false sense of confidence that you would get there, but you would end up running into so many challenges along the way. Your chances of actually achieving that in the way that you planned were very small. Whereas in an agile way, you have less of that clarity up front and less of that prescription, but your chances of actually achieving it and getting something that's high quality that your customer really wants is actually very, very high. And so most companies have switched over to an agile way of working. And I think entrepreneurs by nature, we all work agile.
Yeah,
We tend to do small learning cycles. We're doing MVPs by nature and getting things in front of customers and trying to get feedback. And I think we work agilely without even realizing that we're working agilely sometimes.
yeah, absolutely. And for everybody that's listening, if you don't know what MVP means most minimum viable product. It's the idea of like what's something we can create now, see a result of it, and then improve or iterate upon it. And like you said, Krista, I think that's how most of us as entrepreneurs do operate. We are, I think, wired. Not everybody, but most people, I think, that are entrepreneurs are wired for that. Like, hey, let me try something. Okay, that didn't work. Let me try this. Oh, that didn't work. I'm trying this. Oh, okay, that kind of worked. Let's take that and then take it to the next level. And I think that it's a really interesting way of thinking about things. I think what happens a lot of times in the project management world is there's so much verbiage and terminology it actually overwhelms a lot of right from the go, I can't handle that. No, you really can. The simplicity of what we're talking about here is what you're likely doing. It just needs to be packaged better. So let's talk about the lean out method specifically that you've kind of developed that you're using with your clients to help them. What does that look like? And ultimately, actually, before we even talk about the method, what's the problem that it solves? What are you helping people overcome?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple different things that it solves. It helps eliminate overwork and overwhelm. You get a lot of clarity on what the right things are to be working on because the whole concept of lean is eliminating waste, right? You're trying to focus on just those things that are adding value and that are most important and eliminating everything else. And so the whole lean out method is about that, right? So it's let's eliminate anything that's not adding value. And when you do that, it gives you a lot more clarity and focus, which helps remove that overwork and overwhelm. But in addition, it's also strategic planning. So it's making sure that you're getting really clear on what it is that you actually need to do to hit your goals for your business, and that those goals are in support of the overall vision and direction that you see for the future of your company. And so that's really what the lean out method is in a nutshell, but it does solve making sure that you're hitting your goals and doing so in a way without the overwork and overwhelm.
Yeah, I think that is a huge problem. I mean, I don't know how about everybody else, but I certainly have had my seasons of overwork and overwhelm as an entrepreneur. I think especially in the early days when you don't have a team to support you, you don't have systems in place, you don't have processes that are outlined, and you're just kind of winging it. I kind of thrive on that in some of those seasons, but there comes a point where you go, okay, I can't do this anymore. And it sounds like that's where you can kind of come in and go, hey, let me show you how to fix that. So what does that look like practically for me as an entrepreneur, as a business owner? I'm going, hey, tell me what that looks like. How did that help me in my day to day?
Yeah, so I want to go back to something you said there too about the seasons, because I think it's so important, right? When you're a startup or you're in that emerging stage, it's not the time to be leaning out your business.
Yeah.
That is the time to be figuring out what works. You're usually in more of a hustle mindset. You're kind of trying all the things, wearing all the hats, trying to get ultimately to that product market fit. And it's when you get there that you really do need to then flip over to the process I'm about to walk you through, because that pace isn't sustainable. It really isn't, right? You can't hustle around the clock all the time, every day, all the time, and, give up your family, your friends, whatever those other non-work things are that are important to you, um, for the long haul. You can do it for a long period of time, but you can't do it forever. And
Hmm.
so when you want to level up and you're out of that emerging startup state, what I take people through is 4 steps. It's really reasonably simple, easy in theory, hard to actually do. But the first stage is context. And this is one that I think a lot of people miss, especially people who focus a lot on productivity and planning. They kind of skip over the context, which is what's really important, which is, why are you doing what you're doing and what do you see for your business in the future? And so context starts with your vision. And I call it a next level vision, because I think you want to think as far into the future as you can. And I tell people to look at 3 different facets. It's not just where do you see your business in the future, but where do you see yourself in your lifestyle? What type of business do you want to actually be building? And what type of lifestyle do you want to have? And the third piece that most people miss is, where are your customers at that point in the future? What is it that they need from your company? What is either that transformation that they're looking for, the solution to whatever problem it is that they're going to have at that point in the future? And so that has so much influence on your business model. And if you know that vision and what you want for yourself, what you want for your company, and what you think your customers are going to want and who you want to serve in the future, that helps you actually build a business model and an ecosystem that supports that. And so you start with that vision and then you set goals to actually achieve the vision. Great, you know where you're going, you've got your North Star, you know directionally where you want to be. Now, what are your near term, your 90-day goal? What's the next 90-day goal that's going to help get you there?
Hmm.
Um, and the reason why I think that's so important and why that helps reduce the overwork and overwhelm is it answers 2 questions. Your vision helps answer the question, is it the right thing? When you're looking at decisions about what to be working on and what to put your time or money into. And then your 90-day goal helps you look at, is it the right thing right now? And if you can answer both of those questions, you'll usually find that you need to be doing a lot less than you think you do in the near
Hmm.
term. And so you start with context, and that's really it. Context is your vision, your goals, your business model. Then you move into clarity, and clarity is the actual planning. And so it's building that strategic plan, breaking that goal down into the different projects, features. If you have, a product, looking at what marketing campaigns and different activities are going to support hitting that goal and your sales and growth targets, and just getting really, really intentional with what you do on a day-to-day basis so that it ties back to and is in support of the vision and goals that you have for the business. I usually see a big disconnect. You'll talk to somebody who's struggling, and it's usually really apparent what the struggle is. They've got a vision. They might even have goals, but their day-to-day activities do not tie back to it. They're doing
Hmm.
things on 2 completely divergent paths, and it's not ultimately getting them where they want to be. Um, and so that's the second pillar. The third pillar is commitment. So you know where you want to go. You know what's important in the next 90 days. You've outlined your plan for what you need to do. Now you need to go all in on it. Make sure that it's feasible, something that you can commit to. And you need to commit to working through it even when you hit the tough spots. Because the reality is, no plan, no matter how good you are at planning, goes according to plan. That is just life, right? And business. And so you've got to be willing to be innovative and be scrappy and do what you got to do to work through the roadblocks and the bumps that come up, instead of just abandoning the plan and saying, didn't work, let me try something different. And then the fourth one is Kaizen. It's a lean concept, and it's all about making small continuous improvements. And I truly believe that if you are not growing and advancing in business, you're actually regressing. And to me, that Kaizen is constantly looking at what you have, looking at what's working it really well, and looking at how you continuously improve upon it and make it even better, so that you continue growing as a business and as a business leader.
That's so good. I want to unpack them a little bit because I think there's so much value there for people. And I've seen, well, shoot, I have made mistakes of not having a lot of these things in place along the way. And I know a lot of other people have. So let's start with the first one, which is context. I loved what you said about, kind of defining and asking the question, like, what does my lifestyle need to look like? Why am I doing what I'm doing? All these kinds of things, because I find so often people are very busy, but they don't have any clear direction. And especially in America, like that's our favorite response. Like, how are you doing? Well, I'm really busy. Like everybody
Mm-hmm.
loves to answer that because for some reason, I think we think it means that we're like valuable or we have worth or we are being productive. But busyness and productivity are not the same things. You can be very busy and be getting nothing done. So
Mm-hmm.
like what's a question somebody could ask themselves in that context stage to determine where is my direction? What lifestyle do I want? Like what are some of the questions maybe that they might ask themselves in that stage?
Yeah. And so what I always say is look at other people who you admire and start to, that you admire and start to kind of unpack what it is that you like about what they do and what lifestyle you think they have and what it isn't. And there's many, many different types, but the examples I usually give people is, do you want to be more like that top lifestyle person, the person who's traveling all the time? Maybe it's you in a very small team. Maybe they're not even employees, they're more freelancers, and you just really truly want that freedom and flexibility. It's usually a very passion-based business where you're doing something that you love. You take great joy in helping people, or producing a product or something that is you're deeply passionate about, and you don't want a lot of complexity, a lot of overhead, anything like that. Well, that is going to be very different in the decisions you make and the things that you say yes to and the projects that you take on than the person who's the empire builder. The
Mm-hmm.
person who wants that like multi-million dollar, maybe even billion-dollar company, who's looking to do some big exit, who wants to build this giant team, who wants to have a full product suite, like very, very different styles of business. And the decisions you're making, the things that you're doing, night and day different depending on what type of business you have. And usually if you start to think of those two extremes, you'll start to see which one you gravitate towards. And most people land somewhere in the middle. But
Mm-hmm.
it helps to look at those two extremes to say, yeah, I would like that freedom and flexibility to be able to travel a lot and not have this big, huge group of people dependent on me. But I don't really see myself as a, laptop, person either, always on the road. I kind of want a small team, and I want to have a, couple $1 million business. And that's different, but it starts to kind of point you in that direction.
And it's worth reevaluating that over time too, because there are seasons of life where you might absolutely not want to do any travel, and well, right now none of us can do it anyway. But
Right.
there's going to be other seasons of life where maybe it's a little bit more freeing. I mean, I have 5 young kids. They're not that young anymore, but they're 7 to 15, and so I don't want to do a lot of travel right now. But once they're all grown, and I want to do more speaking engagements once those kind of things are allowed. I'm more than happy to travel because I can just bring my wife along with me. We can just go have little mini vacations based on where I go speak at. I'm all about that. So those things I
Mhm.
think can change at different seasons of life, and that's why it's worth reevaluating these things over time. But there's a difference in reevaluating the context of that question on an annual basis or a biannual basis and every day. That's where people end up in
Right.
chaos and they just don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I think people hesitate to do vision because they feel like it's forever. It's so
Yeah.
permanent. And
Yeah.
it's not. I think a vision statement is different than what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that like real vivid mental image of where
Mhm.
you see yourself in the future. And I think the reality is that grows and evolves as you do. As you mentioned, your seasons, right? With small kids, probably not traveling all the time, but hey, if you get the opportunity in the future, why not? Right? If that appeals to you, that sounds like an adventure. Go for it,
Right.
right? To some people, that never will sound like an adventure, and they're happy not traveling. So it really depends on what's important to you, but it can, and I think really should, evolve over time as you continue to grow as a person and as your circumstances change.
And I love that idea of what you're talking about too, about setting 90-day goals. I think that's so important. That's something we didn't do for a long time as a company, and we've been doing now for quite a few years. And it sounds so simple, but it is pretty simple until you actually implement it and stick to it and do it, that commitment part that you're talking about later on. But it has revolutionized what we're doing. And what's so great about writing down, and I really believe in writing down goals, writing down a 90-day goal is 90 days later, you can look back and go, hey, at the beginning of this 90 days, we said that these things were the most important things. Did they get done or did they not? And if they didn't, why not? What happened? What became more important? And all of a sudden, you've got this level of accountability for yourself, for your leadership team, for your team itself, and for the company as a whole. That's so different than if you don't have those kind of metrics in place that really do help create that context around where are we going? Why are we going there? And then you talked about clarity as the next step, that planning, marketing. What are those daily activities? So what are maybe some warning or red flags somebody might want to look out for that their daily activities aren't aligned with what their bigger vision or goals are?
Yeah, so I love to put funny names on things, but I have a technique that I developed called Grumps, Gromps. And to me, it's something that you can do to just categorize your different daily activities. And your G is your goal and project related activities. And that is realistically where the majority of your time should be. And most people will say, oh yeah, of course, all I work on is goal and project related activities. But when they take the time to actually put pen to paper and look at it, they realize how little of their time is actually in those buckets. The R is your recurring and run activities. And if you as the business owner are spending a lot of time in recurring and run activities, that to me is a red flag. Usually those are the ones that you want to systematize, you want to automate. Sometimes you can delete them by automating or, coming up with some creative way of addressing them, but you certainly should be delegating them. When you're building out your team, usually your recurring run are some of those first things that go into somebody else's plate and off of yours. The O is optimization. So that is, as you're looking at the things that you're doing in your business that are working, you want to take them and make them even better. And I always recommend people have at least an hour a week that they're dedicating to optimization activities. Also, focused on innovation as well. But the M is your miscellaneous, and this is your other red flag bucket. So all of those things that fall into miscellaneous are the things that typically feel urgent and important and are frequently the things that aren't actually your priorities and the things that you need to be focused on. And so I always say, watch the M's. Usually the M's are the things that should get cut completely. The miscellaneous that should get completely from your list gone. But sometimes, things just come up and it's fine. It happens. Look for the patterns in it so you can be a little bit more predictive in when those things are going to hit. Then your P is your personal and self-development. And those are really important. And I always recommend that people call those out because those are usually the ones that people sacrifice when they're in a stage of overwork and overwhelm. And I think if you're not taking care of yourself and you're not focused on your own self-development and growth, you're going to, pay the price of that at some point. And so you need to be making that a priority. And so that's the personal. And then the S is the self-development. So
one of the things that I like about the recurring column that you were talking about, one of the things I always tell people is when a task, if you're a leader in an organization or a CEO, somewhere at that level, when a task comes across your desk, there's 4 questions you should ask yourself. Does it need to be done? Can it be automated? Can it be delegated? And then ultimately that means if it can't be automated, it can't be delegated, and it needs to be done, that means you have to do it. And then the last question is, does it need to be done now? And a lot of times it doesn't need to be done. It can be deleted. Often it can be automated. Even more often, it should be able to be delegated. And at the very end, it very rarely has to be done right now. And I know it's so easy to get caught up in those feelings of, I have to constantly be connected to my internet. I have to constantly be connected to all the things. And you just really don't. I mean, maybe at first you do, but if you have the right systems in place as a leader, you shouldn't have to. I mean, I literally just got back from a 30-day RV trip where I did not check my email or a single message for the first 2 weeks and only checked it a couple of times the second 2 weeks. I couldn't have done that 5 or 10 years ago as a business. Now I can because I have the right systems and processes in place to do that. And it sounds like this whole idea of creating context and clarity and commitment. And what was the last one? Kaizen?
Kaizen, yep.
I'm never going to spell that correctly either, is really important because you're basically giving somebody, hey, here's a system you can follow. Here's a framework. Maybe you've already started those, you've gotten through those early years. You've got a little bit of things established. But I always say, I think entrepreneurs or businesses in general can wing it to about $1 million in revenue and about 10 team members. It varies depending on the industry, but that's a pretty good metric. And then after that, it just devolves into chaos if you don't have some kind of system to follow. So tell me why lean out versus any of the other things that may be out there that might attempt to solve kind of the primary problem, which is overwork, stressed out, worn out, ready to quit ultimately. So why did you develop lean out specifically? And what do you think sets it apart from maybe some of the other tool sets that might be out there?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because there's a lot of good stuff out there, realistically, right? A lot of people have a lot of great stuff and a lot of things. To me, what I don't see is the whole comprehensive system that's what this addresses. And that was why I put it together ultimately. I've been doing this for more than 20 years. I've worked with every type of business imaginable. And so I know that it works, and I know it works really well. And I know it works as a framework in pretty much any industry. Obviously, people need to right size anything that they do to their own business and their own context. But that being said, the principles work. But what I think it does really well is it just helps you get super clear on where you want to go. It gives you those systems and those things to be focused on so that you can actually be lean. It's done in a lean way, meaning there's not a lot of extra stuff in it. And what I see other systems do is they either focus a lot on productivity, but they don't necessarily have the context. So you're getting really productive on things that aren't really the right things to be working on. Or I see people do a lot of planning related things, and they have people honestly way over plan. You spend so much time in the planning that you're not actually out there doing the work that needs to get done, or you're planning so far in advance that you can't be agile and lean and adaptive and respond and kind of change based on what you're learning as you go along. And so I wanted to put something out there that gave people that structure, but also the freedom and flexibility to make it their own and to be able to adapt to what they're learning and what their market is telling them as they go along.
Yeah, I think that is just so helpful. I'm just looking back through these and thinking about that last one, the idea of consistent small improvements over time. You know, I always say that I'm the least comfortable when I'm the most comfortable. And what I mean by that is that if I, as a business owner, especially if I'm just sitting around, I'm like, everything's great, nothing's wrong, there's nothing to make better. It's probably like a lot of ignorance going on there because there's always something that can improve. I always say it's all about progress over perfection. I would much rather see us moving forward. Let's just keep the tire rolling. And often that requires change. I mean, if we were just doing what I did when I started, this business 21 years ago, we'd just be building basic HTML websites. Well, that would not be a very profitable endeavor anymore. But we provide a lot larger range of services. We call ourselves a business growth agency now because we're providing all those marketing services to help people figure out how to grow their businesses. But that's a result of constant iteration. I mean, even right now, we're planning a live event for next March, which is insane to be planning a live event when you can't do live events, but that's what we do. So we're planning a live event for the end of next March, and we've never done that before. And why not do it in the middle of a pandemic? And so it's that kind of constant change. I'm willing to take that kind of risk to do certain things because we got to be stretched. And if we're not, I really think you're probably dying as an organization too.
Yeah, I think that people need to create that space for innovation and that space to really truly be working on their business. And when you're in that overwork, overwhelm, hustle space, a lot of times you don't do that. But it's smart for you to be planning this now and thinking about it now because other people aren't, right? And
Yeah.
so It's so smart, and you need that space for innovation, and you need that constant improvement. You can't settle. To your point, as soon as you start to feel comfortable that things are where they are, that's where you should be really uncomfortable, because it actually means that you're regressing if you're not growing.
And I also think that coming out, especially thinking about this current COVID pandemic crisis that we're all in the midst of right now, is that going back to the lean idea, people need to be leaner now than ever. They need to be smart about where they're spending their time. They need to be smart about where they're spending their money. They need to have a good plan in place. And going at it alone, just winging it, which frankly I did for a long time, is one, high risk, and two, it's very difficult to make that happen with any sense of urgency. And I think I wish back then when I was so young and starting that I had latched onto a framework or an idea like this where I had a system to follow, because I was just kind of winging it. And since then we've had systems and things that we've implemented, and it's made all the difference in our growth, because those are not strengths for me inherently. I am not the project manager brain. I'm the creative entrepreneur, like let's just wing it and see what happens kind of brain, which can be dangerous. So I have to put people around me that are the more detailed people to make sure that those things get done. So I love all this stuff. That idea of thinking about where your time is in your day, being aware of those red flags of recurring and miscellaneous items that maybe need to go to somebody else or don't need to be done at all or don't need to be done now. And then prioritizing your personal time as well. It's easy as an entrepreneur to get burnout for sure. I want to shift gears just a little bit, and there's basically three final things that I want to address before we run out of time today. The first is the question of work-life balance. It means something different to everybody, so I want to know what it means to you and how it's changed in different seasons of your life. The second is going to be kind of parting thoughts that you have to help people build a business that lasts. And the third will just be how people can find you online and learn more about you. So let's start with the first one, which was work-life balance. What does that even mean to you, number one? And because it means something different to everybody. And number two, how has that changed through different seasons of your life?
Yeah, so I talk about work-life balance a lot, and I describe it as sustainable success. To me, you can't realistically have sustainable success in business if you don't have some form of balance. But when I think about that, I think about it on a macro scale instead of a micro scale. I think a lot of times when people are thinking about balance, they're trying to achieve the perfect balance day and the perfect balance week and the perfect balance month. And that to me is where it's not realistic. Not only do you have seasons of life, but you just have seasons of weeks and months where it's a lot heavier. You've got a big launch coming. Obviously, you're going to be more invested in the business at that point. You have a wedding coming. You're going to be more invested in your personal life at that point, right? And so things just happen. And to me, at that macro scale, you want that balance. You want to, identify what's important to you. What other than your business is important to you? And you want to know what those categories are. And then I think that you do need to create that protected time for those things that are important to you. Because if you don't, the business will easily suck up every second of the day that you have, because that's what it does. And if you're anything like me, and probably like you, I'm going to guess, we genuinely love to work. And so we will frequently prioritize that over other things if we don't create the protected space for those other things. But that being said, you do have to just look at that macro scale and say, you know what, this has been a really busy work intensive couple of weeks. Where can I kind of scale back a little bit and spend some more time with my family and friends, or, on self-care or self-development, whatever those categories are for you. And I think if you can look over the course of 90 days and the course of a year and achieve some level of balance, you're doing really, really good. The other thing is, if you take the time to do the proper planning and you know when things are going to hit, you can avoid the kind of around the clock sleepless periods when you have a launch or when you have those big things in business that come up as well. But definitely early on in business, I worked way more than I do now that I'm in that growth and scaling stage. I think that's natural. You do tend to do a lot more in emerging and startup, just because of the nature of trying to figure it all out. But that being said, you can work as much as you want to. If work is your passion,
That's
do
right.
your thing, but make sure that you're putting that
Exactly.
time on what's important.
That's really the question at the beginning of what you stated, which is what is important to you. Because what's important to you may be different than what's important to me. And what's important to me today may be different than what's important to me 20 years from now. And so just like we were talking about, having a vision for the future for the business, I think it's important to have a vision for the future for your whole life. And having those 90-day goals be aligned with that, and coming back and asking that question of what's important, and does my life align with that? Does my schedule align with that? Does my checkbook align with that? We don't really have checkbooks anymore, bank account. And I think those are really, really key questions to ask, because it's really not about balance on the day-to-day basis. It's more about sustainable success is a great way to define it. It's not just success in business, success in life. And what does that look like to you? Because success is one of those words too that means something different to everybody. So, and that's okay. So 2 more questions. One, parting thoughts. When you think about talking to an entrepreneur who's trying to figure this thing out, they've been in business a few years, they've got kind of a foundation in place, but they're not sure where to go now. Should they keep working on scaling it? Should they go back to being an independent contractor? Should they go get another job? How do they build a business that lasts? What are some parting advice and counsel that you might give to them?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest opportunities and mistakes that I see business owners make is we have this natural innate desire to fix what's not working. And the reality is, in business, if you're at that point that you just outlined, you've probably got certain things in your business that are working really well. There's certain products, certain services, certain packages, offers, whatever it is that you have that are performing. Your customers like them, you're passionate about them, they drive good profits for the business. Double down on those and cut the things that aren't working. And I think that is a huge opportunity. And when I'm working with a business to lean out and to really look at their profitability, that's one of the things they're most hesitant to do, but one of the things that makes the biggest difference. You've got 20 products, you've got 4 that are performing great, you've got 16 that aren't. Cut the 16 and double down on the 4, and you will see your profitability go through the roof. You will also eliminate a ton of overwork and overwhelm. And it's not always that black and white. Of course, the 20 might become 10 instead of 4, but it's the key is don't invest so much time in what's not working. Reinvest that time in what is working and continue to make it even better, more valuable, drive more profitability.
Yeah, there's a really great book on that idea that I love called Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud. So anybody out there that wants kind of some encouragement, I'll be honest with you though, it's not an easy read. It's a convicting read when you start talking about needing to cut things, products, or even in some cases, team members, or just people in life that don't need to be in your life anymore. It's a very challenging read, but if that's something you're struggling with right now, people that are listening or watching, go read Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud. It is a powerful book that I probably need to reread myself, to be completely frank. Crista, thanks so much for your wisdom and insight today. It's really made me think about a lot of things that I think will be helpful for myself and my team, which selfishly is half the reason I do the podcast. And I think it'll be great for everybody that's listening and watching as well. Where can people find more about you and what you do in a way that they can kind of get more information?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me at leanoutmethod.com. And every couple of months, I do a free masterclass where I really dive in deep, walk people through creating that next level vision, building their plans, doing everything. If you're interested in that, it's leanoutmethod.com/masterclass.
Great. We will put that link in the show notes, and I'll come back and put it on Facebook and everywhere else. People on Facebook that may be watching, if you have any questions, or if you watch this later and you have questions, put those in the comments. I'll see them. I'll do my best to answer them. If I can't answer them, I'll get Crista connected to it, and she can give you some answers or get you pointed in the right direction. Leanoutmethod.com is the place you want to go to find more information. Crista, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. Super happy to be here.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there, where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.